Hello, welcome to the Nexus Podcast. Here, we're all about connecting anyone and everyone with our environment. We'll aim to do this through sharing knowledge and discussing various topics that show people how they can be better connected to nature and the world we live in. At the end of each episode, we'll also provide some actionable steps that anybody can take to help make our world a better place. I believe that the impact of everyday people can be profound if we all act and strive to leave the world in a better way than we found it, especially our environment. We'll try to keep things enlightening, informative, and educational. I'd love anyone and everyone to be able to listen and enjoy tuning in. I hope we can be the nexus between you and the beautiful world we live in and so rely on. This is Jessica York bringing you another episode of Nature's Nexus. Let's go. Hello everyone and welcome back to the Nature's Nexus podcast. I know it's been a couple of months since my last episode and I do apologise for the break, but I'm back with another episode to share and more to come. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome today's guest, Angus Adair. Hello and welcome, Angus.
Good day, how are you?
I'm good, thanks. How are you going?
Very good, thank you.
That's great. So Angus, before I introduce you to everybody, I'll just ask you a couple of quick questions that I like to ask everybody at the start of my episodes. And the first one is, what is it that you love most about our natural world?
How beautiful it is and how wonderful it is to feel connected to it.
Oh, that's beautiful. And I love that you feel connected because that's sort of what all this podcast is all about, trying to encourage that connection.
Yeah.
Cool. And the second question is, how do you get connected to nature, or when do you feel the most connected to nature?
My wife and I are very spoilt. We have a beautiful 120-acre bush block just out of Armidale and the northern tablelands of New South Wales. And it doesn't take much. I just go and walk around there, listening to the birds, watching the spring flowers, and just feeling part of it. It's like we have our own little national park. We get frogs, birds, koalas, kangaroos, quolls, echidnas, the lot, and just love sitting there watching it happen.
That sounds beautiful. How lucky to have that nice piece of land to enjoy for yourself.
Very.
Awesome. Alrighty. Well, for those of you who haven't met Angus, and I met him myself, I think it was a couple of weeks ago at a local frog talk here in Armidale. Angus is a retired amateur naturalist, which basically means that he's someone who studies and observes nature for personal enjoyment, curiosity, and a desire to learn rather than a formal profession. Does that sound about right?
Definitely.
Yeah. But Angus does have some environmental qualifications. He has an honours degree in natural resources, specialising in water, soils and wildlife. He also has a Masters of Environmental and Local Government Law. Angus did additional studies on herpetological techniques and advanced herpetology in the early 1990s and fell in love with frogs. And for those of you who might not know, herpetology is the study of reptiles and amphibians. He did his thesis on bird utilisation corridors in agricultural landscapes and has worked in the public service most of his career. Some of the interesting things Angus has done is that he undertook crocodile research and conservation measures in Darwin. In the early 1990s, looked at soil erosion in the establishment of banana plantations, Coffs Harbour, then became an endangered fauna officer with the Soil Conservation Service for New South Wales, looking after logging and clearing on protected lands. Then he became an environmental protection officer with the New South Wales EPA, finally becoming a specialist investigator with the EPA until retirement. And Angus currently spends a lot of his time volunteering with the Armidale Urban Rivercare Group and Generic Lions Club. Did you want to quickly tell us about the Armidale Urban Rivercare Group and the sort of things you do with that, Angus?
Oh, yes, thank you. So I'm a member of the Armidale Urban Rivercare Group. We were set up in 2001 by a fellow called Bruce Warren, who used to work up at the University of New England in the hydrology area, and he had a love for Generic Creek. And he was also a lifetime resident of Armidale, and he had noticed that the creek had really significantly degraded in his years in Armidale, going from largely a cleared sort of urban catchment to a creek that has become exceptionally weed infested, particularly with willows, privet, poplar, that sort of stuff. Anyway, after setting up the group, we decided to basically clear out the exotics and plant natives. And we have been doing that since 2002. We've worked along nearly 8 kilometres of Jumeric Creek, and we've brought about $740,000 in grants into Armidale.
Wow.
And we've now planted somewhere around 140,000 natives along Jumeric Creek. We have, when we first started, there was basically no guidance on how to do restoration or that sort of work in an urban catchment in New England. We used to plant plants at 2-metre spacings because that's what they used to do on the farms, and we would promptly lose them all in the weeds, even though we were working on them all the time. And we now go to a high-density localized planting system. We can get to about 90% success rate in the first 3 years, and then after that, maintenance is every couple of years on that to stop the further ingress of willow that come down the creeks, the river, and unfortunately privet and blackberry, which are brought in by Currawong.
That sounds like an amazing effort. And that's mostly a volunteer organisation?
Yep, absolutely. We've got about 100 to 120 on our distribution list. We hold, during spring, summer and autumn, we hold community, hopefully community planting days if we've got funding and plans. If not, some other working bee. It's pretty casual. We insist on everybody having a morning tea and a lunch, and for a gold coin donation, and the Armidale Jumeric Lions Club come along and cook for us. So can't get much better.
That sounds like a great organisation. It sounds like the sort of thing more towns could use to look after their local waterways.
Absolutely. And just as an aside, Uralla has an urban Rivercare group as well. Unfortunately for them, most of the creek line in Uralla runs through private property, which makes it a lot more difficult. In Armidale, Jumeric Creek is all Crown Reserve, owned by the Crown, but in most instances managed by Armidale Regional Council.
Yeah, okay. Yep. Oh, that's awesome work. Thanks for letting us know what that is. All right. Well, jumping in today's conversation, we're mostly going to talk about frogs today, since that is Angus's peak interest, and he has quite a bit of knowledge about them, which I'm excited to delve into. So, for listeners who haven't met you before, Angus, can you tell us a bit about your background and what sparked your interest in frogs?
Yep. Actually, I have two, other than my wife, two loves, frogs and birds. I was a birder from very, very early on. And in fact, as you mentioned, I did my thesis on bird populations in the New England. When I started a job in the early 1990s, I became an endangered fauna officer with the New South Wales Soil Conservation Service. And this was a position that was created after the beginning of the New South Wales legislation to protect fauna in New South Wales, other than the National Parks and Wildlife Act. And what that meant was that the Soil Con had to assess whether an activity undertaken on protected land was having an impact on endangered fauna. Now, I was fairly comfortable with my mammals and birds, which was the prime listings in the early 90s, but there were also frogs and reptiles listed, and I had very little knowledge of that. So fortunately, I had a very supportive work environment, and they were happy to send me off to do a course in herpetological techniques and then advanced herpetology. At that stage, it was at the Ultimo TAFE, now UTS. I studied under a guy called Dr. Harry Eamon. And out of that, I worked out I was definitely not a snake person and very much a frog person. In fact, snake people are quite bizarre. I still have that feeling. Anyway, after doing that course, all those courses, I was fortunate enough to, again, get additional support for work and became quite active in the very early NFrog programs, which was a national endangered frog survey process that was underway at that time, and did some really, really good and very extensive frog survey work. So everything from high alpine sort of stuff in the New England and Barrington to acid swamps on the coast, all the way down to low bidgee wetlands and that sort of stuff out west. So I covered a really big bit of the state and having the joy of looking at frogs. And that's sort of how I got interested in frogs.
Yeah, wow, that's a lot of variety there with all the different habitats.
I was lucky, very lucky.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. So along all your work you've been doing, what did you learn about frogs in the sense that, how important they are in the environment and the environmental health?
Well, frogs have rather unique, or frogs and newts, which are the true amphibians, have a rather unique process in that they have a exceptionally porous skin. And that skin means that they are very sensitive to anything that's in their surrounding environment, particularly pollutants that might be in water, or even some atmospheric pollutants and things like temperature and humidity and all those sorts of things. So they're particularly susceptible to fairly minor changes in their environment. It's a little bit of a generalization because actually in my work with the EPA, I've investigated, pollution events and that sort of thing. And I've actually found some species of frogs in quite polluted environments. I don't know how long they survived there, but, I could hear frogs calling in a creek where a fuel spill had gone through, or an oil leak or a sewage leak or something like that. But I would suspect that they would probably be adversely impacted shortly after that. Anyway, the other thing with frogs is that they're particularly sensitive to both fungal and viral attack. And unfortunately, we're seeing a pretty significant global decline in frog populations around the world to virus and also to a type of fungus. It seems to be a little bit cyclical. At the moment, things are looking okay. I strongly suspect that is not an indication of the viruses or fungi. It's more an indication that we've had a number of wet years and things are looking pretty good. Frogs tend to get more affected when they're under stress, and that's during dry periods or a change in environment or habitat. Anyway, frogs are sort of, in an ecological perspective, frogs are sort of considered a sentinel species, one of those things that's the canary in the coal mine, an indicator of a decline in habitat suitability. The converse way to look at it is if you have a diverse and a complete frog population, you're usually looking at quite a healthy ecosystem and environment. Unfortunately, we do perhaps have to talk about cane toads. Obviously not an Australian species, but like every invasive species, it seems to be a slight exception to the rule. It seems to be able to handle a broad variety of habitats and seems to be able to spread through environments that you would not expect a species of that type to come from. And just as a note on cane toads, I was fortunate enough to go to the Amazon in South America in year 2000, and I have seen a cane toad the size of a soccer ball.
Wow.
So in their natural environment, which is where they came from,
wow,
they are as hideously grotesque as they have been. And
Just say that.
and just as you aside, I'm sorry, just
I was going to say that must have been one ugly toad if it was as big as a soccer
it
ball.
was a very ugly toad. But having said that, I also got the absolute joy of seeing poison dart frogs, which
Oh wow, that'd be pretty.
they really do look like the photos. That you just look at them and go, how can an animal be so brightly coloured? It's fantastic.
Mm. No, that's lovely. So yeah, it sounds like they really are a key indicator of habitat health.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's, I mean, you would get your parallels with other species, other fauna groups, for example, the birds. If you have a really diverse predatory bird population, such as the large owls and the large raptors, it's usually an indicator of good environmental health. But you start losing those keystone species, and it indicates that there's either not enough food, roosting, or some other sort of ecological niche that they need.
Yeah, because diversity is key with nature. But with the frogs, it would be somewhat seasonal too, wouldn't it? Like if they're more out in the warmer months, they tend to be a bit noisier and calling more. Does that mean that you wouldn't necessarily stress that the environment's in a bad condition in wintertime just because the frogs are less active?
Absolutely, and particularly for somewhere like the New England and the Northern Tablelands. In winter, we really only have 3 species of frog that call up here. 2 of the crinias, which are the really small toadlets, and one of the tree frogs, Latoria varroa, or the whistling tree frog. They're the only species that will call in winter. Right now, we're in spring, and it's been even though it's dry, I'm now beginning to hear the other species that I associate it with spring and summer. And quite frankly, there's nothing better than a huge storm event coming through, particularly at dusk, and then going outside and you can just hear the frogs go off. And not on the current property that I'm on, but on our previous property, we recorded 12 different species on that property.
Oh, lovely.
I think we're up to nine here, and I'm hoping that we'll get the other 3, or I just haven't heard the other 3 yet.
Yeah, yeah. And they can be so loud, can't they?
Oh, absolutely. Look, when I was doing this end frog work in the 90s, I was in a Wallam swamp environment on the coast, and we came across a population of the rocket frogs, Latoria nasuta. And I didn't have a noise meter on me, but I reckon they were reaching about 100 to 110 decibels.
Yeah.
It was absolutely deafening.
Yeah, that would be so deafening. I think, isn't it 80 decibels is starting to be the limit for the work health and safety for human hearing, I think, or around that, and 5, I think I've heard.
Yeah, and just to give you an idea, a jet engine taking off at 100 meters is about 120 decibels.
Wow. So, I don't know, you might not know this, but it'd be interesting. Is there a way people can find out what a good number of species in an area for for healthy frog population would be, or is that getting a bit complicated?
No, actually, it would be quite easy. So I'll talk about this a little bit later, but there is an excellent app. It's free. You can download it. It's called Frog ID. It's from the Australian Museum. Now, that works off geolocation. So wherever you have your phone, it will go, these are the types of species that we would expect in your area. So that'll give you an idea of the types of species you might have there. You would then have to narrow that down to the specific environment. You know, are you near water? Are you well away from water?
Yep.
Have you got forest or grassland or those sorts of things? That would allow you to narrow down what you'd find in your specific area. But if I turn the Frog ID app on my phone, it will come up with 25 frogs that you might find in this area. But the reality is, for me, and in the Armidale area, 12 is good. You only have to go as far as Mount Yarrowick to the west and you start getting the western species, and you only have to go to the Gorge country in the east and you start getting the eastern species, which start boosting those numbers up.
Yeah.
But,
Okay.
about 12 is what we would easily find here.
Yeah. So that's a pretty great resource for anybody in Australia, I suppose. But
Oh, absolutely. Yes,
yeah,
yes.
yeah. Oh, that's handy. So how
Yeah.
do getting back onto why frogs are important, how do they contribute to our local ecosystems that makes them so important, beyond their famous croaking?
And what a beautiful croak it is. Um, Look, frogs are a key part of the ecosystem if the ecosystem is healthy. They're a really important food source for many larger predators. Birds, reptiles, and mammals all will predate on frogs. And in fact, large frogs will predate on small frogs.
Mm-hmm.
Um, in the aquatic ecosystem, tadpoles will be food to native fish. Depending again on where you are, up in the tablelands, we don't get a lot of really big fish, but certainly small tadpoles would be suitable for that. And just to give you a little bit of an indication of how we've stuffed up the environment with the introduction of things like gambusia, which is the mosquito fish, they predate on tadpoles. So that doesn't help our recruitment of frog populations.
Yeah, and they're competing with the
Um,
native fish for food.
Exactly,
Mm.
exactly. Look, one of the advantages of frogs is that generally speaking, most populations, if they get good conditions, uh, and most species can breed at an amazing rate. And you could get frog spawns of 100 to, unfortunately, with a cane toad, 10,000.
Yeah.
And you can get high fertilization rates and high recruitment from those, but sometimes that's not enough to counteract the other threats that are on frogs. In our instance in Armidale, an urban environment, or air pollution, water pollution, those types of things.
Mm. And then I guess the flip side of that too is that the frogs themselves eat other things. So I guess are they a form of insect control with all the bugs they're probably eating and the things frogs eat?
I'm glad you asked, Jess, because around my house, I have frog hotels and significantly less mozzies.
Just another benefit.
I can't actually claim that as a proper environmental experiment, because I also have got about, I don't know how many, but I've got a lot of bat boxes and bat tubes up around my place as well. So it all contributes. But seriously, I mean, just as an example, I have frog hotels, which I can describe a bit later.
Yeah.
But I have two species of frog that use those, Latoria dentata and Latoria perroni, the Perrin's tree frog or the bleating tree frog. And out in our barbecue area in summer, I would sit out there and have to put out candles and that sort of stuff to try to get some citronella. We don't have to worry about that so much. I will go out, and the next morning there will be masses of amounts of frog poo which have been eating all those bugs that have been coming to the windows. It's just, it's fantastic. And they then go and hide in my little frog hotel, come out the next night, happy as, and I'm of course happy as well.
Yeah, it's an amazing natural solution to that problem that I'm sure lots of people have of an evening with all the mozzies and bugs.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yep.
Yeah. So what might the changes in frog populations tell us about the state of our waterways and our land management practices?
So look, frog populations can tell us a lot about the surrounding environment that we have. In a agricultural or landscape environment, land management practices can have a really deleterious effect on frog populations, particularly, for example, grazing in and near waterways significantly damages the vegetation that the frogs would live in. Particularly cattle, they pollute the water that they drink, so they will urinate and defecate in the water and cause major eutrophication issues in those environments. That's obviously not great for frogs. Access to creek banks and that sort of thing, particularly with cattle, sometimes with sheep, you get soil erosion, the movement of soil into the aquatic ecosystem. causes turbidity, temperature changes, siltation. All these things have significant impacts on tadpole viability. Even cropping and that sort of stuff, really large swathes of cropping, if there's no buffers between those crops and a waterway or a drainage line, you'll find during a rain event, large volumes of sediment will move into those drainage lines and cause those problems that I was just mentioning. Most of those don't impact on the frogs themselves, apart from the vegetation loss, but the ability for the tadpoles to successfully develop to completion in a really degraded water environment means that there's no recruitment of frogs, and that's where your declines start to happen.
Yeah, okay. Some serious issues. And I've seen that come across before, actually, with, land, livestock access to waterways. What a big difference it makes compared to, if you could fence it off and pump it to a trough, which probably takes a bit more effort and money to do that. But yeah, it can make a difference, can't it?
But occasionally the governments come out with funding for those sorts of works, fencing off rivers and stream banks, etc., and having gravity-fed pipes to a hard stand water trough outside the water environment. Those sorts of things can be done. Just as an aside, an excellent example of where this is done. If you ever go out to Dangar Falls and you're out on the dirt road, you go around a fairly hard left-hand bend, and then just down from there is a beautiful dam that has been fenced off totally, and they've done some native planting. And you can just see it from all the other dams around. That dam has beautiful clear water, and I've not been out there at night, but I would strongly suspect it would have a really good, vigorous frog population. There are ways around this. It might cost a bit of money, but the benefits of having that diverse ecosystem on your agricultural activities probably far outweigh those costs.
Yeah, and I think I've seen studies before as well, which I'm not sure if some of the studies are still going, but I thought there was some sort of preliminary study done. It might have been in Canada or somewhere. I'd have to look it up. And I think it even mentioned the production benefits for the livestock as well, because they're having a better water quality. The water's obviously just a better quality from the surrounding vegetation and everything. It helped with their weight gain and their yields and everything, and the cattle ended up being healthier, which was probably a bit more of a tempting advantage for the farmers who are making their income off this.
Look, absolutely. And we have, bearing in mind I'm talking about the Armidale area, we have some really, really good farmers in the Armidale area, in the land care movement, some on the edge of it, some are looking at, really different ecosystem management systems like hydrated landscapes and that sort of thing. Almost all of those fence off their creek lines and have alternative water sources, and they have long-term hydration benefits for the surrounding pastures. Now, this is for a pastoral environment as opposed to an agricultural environment, but I'm sure there would be other equivalents for cropping ecosystems.
Yeah. What do you mean by the hydration benefits, as in for the soil?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
So the Peter Andrews stuff that came out of the Bylong Valley in the Hunter many, many years ago, I really, really disagree with his philosophy of using any vegetation, and in his case, willows, in a creek line. But I very, very much agree with his leaky weir and other hydration systems. And again, there's another creek line that you can pass if you're driving from Bungendore to Braidwood on the in Kings Highway down that way, and you go through a river. The road passes over a river that's managed by the Malone Institute, and you can just see it. It's, the whole area can be dry, and in that dry environment, there is still a lush river ecosystem by the work that they've done, and it's fantastic. I haven't done any frogging down there, but I mean that's an environment in which I would expect to find a very significant diversity of frog species.
Yeah, okay. And what do you mean by you disagree with his suggestion to use vegetation such as willows, or is that just willows, or does he vegetation in general?
He wants anything that will grow in a creek line, and he uses willows. I have spent what feels like a lifetime, but it's only 24 years, clearing willows out of Jimeric Creek, and I do not want to see another willow in a creek ever.
Yeah.
The damage that they cause by their annual leaf drop into a water body, the eutrophication that occurs from that significant biota input, in my view, it takes away from all the other benefits that you're doing creating that environment.
Yeah, so it's more just like your native grasses and reeds to be the beneficial, like your native vegetation is what you want.
Absolutely. And it's not just grass and reeds. You can have tea tree and callistemon next to those sorts of environments. Usually they're very cold in our environment and down in Canberra. So things like your peppermints and your cold climate eucalypts, they can all grow in those environments without the need of having a willow there.
Yeah, yeah. So are there any surprising facts about frog biology or behavior that most people wouldn't know?
Yes, a couple. For example, most of the frog calls that you hear are actually a male sitting out to a female saying, hello, I'm here. And in fact, you can, we have a Jimeric Creek in Armidale. You can go along Jimeric Creek and there's a species that we've got, which is called the pobblebonk or the eastern banjo frog, Limnodonastes jimerili, and it has a call that goes bonk. And you can stand next to the creek when these things are calling, and one will call and he'll go bonk. And then the guy down the creek a little bit will go bonk, I'm bigger than you. And then it'll just keep going, and you can listen to them. They just call back and forwards down the creek. Bonk, 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 bonk.
Yeah.
So mainly males. Females really don't make much of a noise. They do occasionally give a distress screech or a little chirp if they're handled or things like that. Because of the spread of viruses and fungi, we really recommend that frogs aren't handled. Look, but don't touch. So that's a pretty cool fact. Most frogs are calling are mostly males.
And I have heard those boys calling around here, and it's funny, some of the frog sounds you hear. I just wouldn't guess it was a frog. It's just not what I expect it to sound like, especially those pobblebonks.
Yep. Look. Oh man, I should have prepared this for you earlier. If you ever get the chance, look up the call for the Blue Mountains tree frog. It's the most hysterical call ever.
I might be able to edit it in for our listeners if I look it up. Blue Mountains tree frog.
Almost certainly you'll find a call on iNaturalist, I suspect.
Yeah, okay.
And another interesting fact about frogs is the males have something called a nuptial pad. So these are two pads which are on each of their thumbs, and it's on the inside of the thumb. And the males use them to grip the females when they're mating. So the female is almost invariably larger than the male. And as she's laying the eggs, the male will discrete the semen, and he's doing that while he's holding on, and he uses his nuptial pad. So if you do ever have a frog in your hand, which I don't recommend, you can usually tell if it's a male or female by the front palm, having a look on the inside of the thumb and seeing if there's a little brown or black pad.
Oh, there you go. That's an interesting evolutionary fact.
Yes, there you go. Actually, I don't know if that's relevant for global frogs, but it certainly is for Australian.
Yeah. Oh, that's good to know. So what are some of the main challenges for our frogs today, both, in Australia and also globally?
The reality is global habitat loss, everything from Amazonian rainforests to clearing for paddocks for vegetation here in Australia, in the New England, highly modified ecosystems that are left behind after clearing, which is effectively habitat loss. You're just taking away all those valuable components that a frog needs to be able to do its functions to ensure its further survival, which is effectively eat, breed. And if it cannot successfully complete either of those, it can't survive. I mentioned this earlier, but the other big one is I think what's happening is with the significant changes in the environments in which frogs live, they are under significantly more pressure and stress, which then leaves them far more susceptible to disease. And particularly we have a fungus and we have some viruses that are going around, and they're causing global population issues. And in fact, we do have these in Australia. Just out of some curiosity, there's been some recent research which has been shown that you can make a frog sauna. So this has been used for the green and golden bell frog, Latoria aurea, in the Sydney Basin. And what they do is they basically paint bricks black like a house brick. It absorbs the sun and gets warm, and the frog goes and substrate basks on it, which means it's contacting the brick and getting the warmth out of it. And it's thought that warmth helps the frogs counter the diseases better. So there are ways around that, but I strongly suspect that they would not be needed if we didn't have those pressures on the frogs in the first instance.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I know I've definitely heard about the chytrid fungus disease that's plaguing the green golden bell frogs, and I did see some things about the frog hotels, and I can't remember if I saw the bit about the frog sauna, but they are doing some work to help with that, which is good, and it's always good to hear solutions that people are coming up with and things people can do to help, because I love hearing solutions and not just the problems.
Yeah. Well, absolutely, I totally agree with you, but I would also say it's a bit of a pity that we have to find the solutions after creating the problems.
Yeah, but it's all learning, isn't it? I think people are great at learning, so hopefully we learn from the problems we've caused and we do better.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So are there some things that your Armidale Urban Rivercare group is doing to help with frogs?
Look, overall, clearing of willow-infested creek and then re-establishing natives has a huge impact on the frog populations. When these willow stands get going, they are basically a monoculture of willow. There's no or there is very little to no native vegetation in there at all. Willow's actually a member of the Salix family, and they give off things called alleliopards. So these are chemicals which are released into the water to reduce other plant competition, and that actually can also have an effect on water chemistry and other ecosystem organisms in that environment. The willows tend to create really quite an anaerobic aquatic ecosystem. So by removing the willows, firstly, we've done a really good thing because we're reducing those impacts straight away. Then the work that we do with Rivercare is re-establish as close as we can get to a native ecosystem with native shrubs, grasses, trees, and that sort of stuff, all of which help with that thing. We have just completed a very large project. The Armidale Urban Rivercare Group was successful in gaining a $290,000 grant from the New South Wales Stronger Communities Fund in 2021. And we the fund was titled Weedy Wasteland to Wildlife Wetland Project. We had a very large section of the creek which had been taken over by willows. It took us 18 months to clear it.
Wow.
We did not use any machinery in stream. That brings in a whole different suite of environmental legislation and controls that we didn't want to deal with. So everything was felled in stream with chainsaws.
Yep.
And then it was all dragged to the bank with chains and a tractor, and then lifted over the bank and cut up and moved away. And it took 4 to 6 people, 3 days a week, 18 months to do that.
Wow, that's massive.
It was a big project. And just as an aside, I'm 57. I'm the youngest in that group by about 15 to 20 years. So we are very fortunate in that, our founder, Bruce Warren, he's really good on large machinery, tractors and that sort of stuff. We have a group member, Gordon Bell, who actually taught chainsaw operation at TAFE in Armidale for 20 years, and he's a master fellow. He did a lot of that work. And then we had a lot of lackeys who carried chains and got wet and muddy and all that sort of thing. Anyway, after getting the site cleared, we could see what we were dealing with. We then had money to contract Dr. Sarah Micah from the University of New England's Aquatic Restoration and Ecology Group. And she designed a principal wetland. She didn't design it that we had to put this thing in this location exactly. It was more in this ecotone or this environment, we should be using these types of species and that sort of thing. And also under her guidance, we did a lot of re-establishment of pool and riffle stuff. Now, again, as we couldn't take machinery in there, we did that by carrying logs in and laying them across existing streams and then backfilling with river rock and effectively creating a pool zone and a fall into, or the riffle zone, into a little pond, aerating the water, increasing oxygen and all that sort of stuff. Once we got that done, we got to the really fun bit, which was planting, and we planted 15,000 native plants.
Wow.
Over 2 years. We had a lot of help from Armidale school groups, other community groups, Zonta, Lions, all that sort of stuff. And we've converted about a 200-metre strip of basically dead creek. I can now stand there and listen to 5 species of frog easily.
What a wonderful reward.
So we've had, and just as an aside, we've had some really interesting birds in there, bastion thrushes, little grass birds. We know we've had successful breedings of plovers and Pacific black ducks. The clamorous reed warblers have moved in. It's just been an absolute joy to see the transformation.
Yeah, and it is so rewarding, isn't it, when you see the other species come back and, nature sort of reclaiming the space when you give it the chance.
Absolutely, absolutely. And we're really fortunate in that Armidale has a really strong community of really good environmental monitoring people. So, for example, a guy called Steve Debus, he's been doing bird surveys along the creek for, as long as I can remember.
Yes, I had him on my podcast in the last episode, actually, so I had a good chat with Steve.
There you go. Well,
told me all about his wonderful raptor work.
Well, absolutely, absolutely. Anyway, he's noticed changes in bird populations as we gradually remove these willows, which is great. We don't have empirical data as such. It's more a presence-absence process, but we know that we're having an effect because we're just seeing more species that we don't see in these monocultures of willows.
Yeah, and you don't necessarily need the studies to show you the difference it's making, especially when you're so familiar with the place. You can just see it yourself.
Yeah, it would be helpful for funding bodies.
It would be, yes. It's always good.
It would
it's
be
good
great
proof.
if we could, with some science.
Yeah.
This is why we need to do this.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. Oh, that's very encouraging. That's so good to hear.
Yeah, it's fantastic. And, it's great that you can go to somewhere literally in the middle of town. It's probably about a kilometre to the east of the middle of town, but, it's close enough. And you can just get this huge diversity right there. It's fantastic.
Yeah, that is fantastic. And speaking of, community work, you had your recent talk here that you did at the Armadale Tree Group, and you mentioned sort of the power of community involvement, which I also strongly believe in. How can, everyday people help monitor or protect frogs in their area?
Wow.
It's a big
There's three components to that.
we can break it down.
Yeah. Okay. So let's do the protect bit first. We can, if you have land, if you have a house, even if you're renting and you can get an approval to plant some native species, maybe even get a clamshell from Bunnings for $20 and put some rocks around it and fill it with water and put some plants there. I did that when I was in the middle of town, and within a year, our closest body of water was 200 meters away. And within a year, I had 4 species of frog on a street in Armadale. So you can make a change just by doing little things like that. If you don't have a garden space, you can build a frog hotel. It's effectively a pot plant, line it with plastic so it's waterproof, chuck a few of those different diameter poly pipes in, like 30, 45, 60 mil poly pipes, add some water, put a bit of juncus in it, keep it out of direct sunlight and just keep the water up to it. And in Armadale, we'll get 2 species of frog using that for 6 months of the year in summer. How easy.
And I can share a photo of that too if with your permission, Angus. I got a photo of one of your frog hotels before your talk. I put that on my social media page to give people a bit of an idea of what you're referring to.
On a more extensive scale, if you are on a property and you have the ability to do things, fence off water environments. If you need access to water for stock, get a siphoning system to an area away from a creek line, set up a trough and let your cattle or sheep or whatever stock you have get water from there. The change that will happen, even if you don't do any remediation work on your creek, dam, pond, it will do it itself. You can obviously speed that along. Really important other things, and I would imagine that the people who are listening to this type of podcast don't do this at any rate. Don't litter. Don't pollute. If your dog does a poo in the park, pick it up. All these things, they change, if they run into stormwater, they change the ecology of the receiving environment, which is a creek or a stream or something like that. I am still amazed at the amount of plastic that we come across in Generic Creek. We felled a really big willow once in the creek. So it had about a 1 meter diameter at breast height. So that's a pretty big thing. Unfortunately, we didn't get the fall quite right. And as it fell over, it pulled up a root ball. That root ball was about 1 meter deep, not round, deep. So the bottom of that root ball had previously been 1 meter under the ground. And there was plastic at the bottom of that root ball.
What? Why did you have to put it in there?
Well, because plastic had washed into the creek. The roots of the willow had trapped it in there. It had then silted up and grown around over that. And that probably happened 15, 20 years ago.
Wow.
So, it's insidious, the amount of litter and pollutant that we have in our waterways. And it's really important to ensure that we reduce and stop that. And call friends out. If they do it, say, hey, that's going to end up in the ocean and it's going to cause a whole lot of damage along the way if you don't pick that up.
Yeah.
On a more social note, spread the word. Yeah, frogs are sentinel species. Let's do something for the frogs. Maybe it's cute or sexy to have a beer at the pub on a Friday night and talk about how good your frog hotel is. Why not? Or make a frog pond in the garden, and take a photo every week and post it on your socials and go, look how it's going.
Yeah.
Fantastic! It just gets the word out.
Yeah.
The other part of that question was how to monitor frog populations. Frog monitoring is actually quite difficult because of the interaction of rhinoviruses and fungi and all that sort of stuff. We really don't encourage people to hold frogs anymore. So the best way to monitor a frog is to learn their calls. Now that's pretty tricky, but if you put the time and effort into it, it's actually just a different accent or somebody saying something slightly differently. And you can learn very quickly at least a couple of your local frog calls. If you're not comfortable doing that, go and download the Frog ID app, and there's a recording system on that app which will allow you to record that call, send it off to the Australian Museum, and they'll get back to you and tell you what species you've got. I mean,
how handy.
How good's that?
Pretty good.
It does take a while. It might take a month or so or whatever, but they are really, really good. Now, obviously, they use that data to say, okay, Angus found a Crinius signifera in this location at this time, but that's fine. That's how we work on citizen science, by gaining these maps of where there's a presence and absence of species.
Yeah, and another good thing about that app too is it's free, isn't it? So it's pretty easy for anybody to go and get it. The app store.
Free, and my understanding is that they're pretty good in sharing that data as well. So that allows further scientific research. Far more informed development applications and development assessments and all those sorts of things. So it's really important to get that sort of data into some sort of electronic format so that we know where species are.
Yeah. And in case we didn't mention it, I can't remember, I don't think we did, but another good way to protect frogs is just to avoid clearing native vegetation where possible too, isn't it? Especially if you can hear frogs in there in summertime.
Absolutely. Look, that really comes under habitat destruction. The converse to that is retain native vegetation.
Yeah.
And just as an aside, if you're out west, you can get frog populations really quite far from a aquatic ecosystem, like kilometre or two.
Wow.
And so don't just go and clear a paddock full of trees because there's no there's no water near it. There will be frogs there. They might not come out until it gets a soaking of rain, but there'll be the burrowing frogs like the crucifix frog and those sorts of things. When it rains, out from behind the bark of a tree will come something like Latoria dentata, the bleating tree frog, and it'll go ballistic. They're out there all the time. They just need the vegetation to survive. So preferably don't clear. If it's already cleared, maybe start looking at some restoration work.
Yeah, we could talk a bit more about that, is that people can also help frogs by maybe planting more natives. And you mentioned that in your talk, especially, talking to your maybe your local native nursery or someone who knows more about the plantings. And I'm sure there's online resources as well, where people can plant, trees, shrubs, grasses, and even a diversity of vegetation to help bring frogs back into an area and support frogs.
Absolutely. And look, we're really, really lucky in Armidale that we've got an amazing group called the Armidale Tree Group. It's a not-for-profit native nursery. It was set up in the 1980s with the goal of revegetating the New England after the massive eucalypt dieback programs dieback events that occurred at that time. Fortunately for us, we've been working with them for 24 years now. And, they will sell you a creekland pack, and that will have all the species you need to put in your garden to make frog-friendly habitat. It will have grasses, sedges, carax, juncus. It will have shrubs such as callistemon and tea tree. And if you want to, they'll recommend trees that will have what we call dehiscent bark, or bark that the tree will lose each year. And as it does that, it has little cracks behind that bark, and that's where the frogs live. And there's varieties of trees that you can have in an urban environment, like your Eucalyptus stellulata and your snow gum and those sorts of things that will go really nicely in the backyard. Don't get too big, won't cause any root issues in the sewage, won't fall on the house.
Yeah.
All those sorts of things you can get from the tree group, and they are fantastic.
Yeah. And I'm sure other towns too beyond Armidale would have similar things. So if people just did a bit of research or looking around, I'm sure they could find similar solutions in their area.
Absolutely. And some areas that don't have maybe commercial nurseries, don't forget to think about state forest nurseries. Quite a few of those around the state, particularly in New South Wales, have local native species as well.
Yeah, which I think is key to your planting, is planting the species local to your particular area.
Yep. And just as a side, if you're really keen, go out to a bit of bush, grab a couple of seeds, put them in a pot and see if you can grow them.
Yeah. So, with that probably brings us on a bit to like citizen science. And I know we mentioned so if people want to get more involved in those sorts of things, or if, looking at apps like there's the Frog ID, or citizen science programs. And also I think there's a Facebook group you mentioned people can get onto if they want.
Yep. So particularly with the Facebook group, it's called the Frog and Tadpole Study Group. FATS is its acronym. I used to go to the actual events when I was living in Sydney. They used to be held at the Australian Museum. Now they're held out at Homebush. They have monthly catch-ups. If you're in Sydney, absolutely fantastic to go there. You will meet frog-mad people, and you can talk frogs to your heart's content. If you're not able to access Sydney, go onto their Facebook page, like them, if you're able to find a frog, or if you hear a call of a frog, you can download it onto their Facebook page, and one of their top contributors will say, hey, that is a whatever it is. And it's just a really good way to network with other people who have a similar interest and passion about frogs.
Yeah, for sure. And I think on another note too, there's some other resources. If listeners want to look it up, I think the Atlas of Living Australia often has citizen science projects listed that you might be able to look into, or maybe your own country might have similar things. I mean, I know Australia also has national parks, often do a lot of surveys that they call on citizen scientists for. So there's other ways to get involved too.
Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep.
So maybe sort of calling on your memorable experiences now. Do you have a memorable experience from working with frogs in the field?
Many. And just as an aside, it can be as lovely as yesterday standing next to Jimerick Creek and listening to 3 species of frogs when I was doing work. We were literally cutting out blackberries and the pobblebonks were calling, and I was just going, oh, how good's this? Mm-hmm. I was fortunate enough when I was doing that end frog work in the early 90s to be working down in the Low Bidgie wetlands, which is down near Hay. It's a really flat bit of country and full of lignum swamp and that sort of thing. It was classed as Category C protected land at that time, and I was doing survey work down there. And I was the first person to get a record of Latoria raniformis, the southern bell frog, in the Low Bidgie. And not only that, I got a photo. Oh. And I showed the blue thighs and everything, and we all went off to national parks and went into their national parks Atlas of Wildlife at the time, I think it was. I don't know if that's what that is now, but so that was pretty special, I have to say. I was with another person. They didn't really quite understand while I was jumping around like a mad at the time, getting rather excited about finding this frog. So that was pretty cool. But, it doesn't have to be something special, really unique or something special like that. I can go down to the tree group, and they've got a beautiful native environment there. And I can go up to a lamandra in summer with a bit of humidity in the air, and I can find dwarf green reed frogs or eastern sedge frogs, Latoria fallax. And I'll call one of the the staff over and go, "Here, look at this little fella,"
Yeah.
and just the joy that you see on their face, because they wouldn't put the time and effort, or
Yeah.
they're busy with other things or whatever, and just to see that sort of joy, and you go, that's made somebody happy today.
Yeah. Sounds like you're the right person in the right place at the right time on both occasions, and you just see what other people might miss because they don't realise.
Well, that's exactly right. But I mean, it's also interests and skill sets, and I just happen to have an interest in this. And if other people seem to if it rubs off on other people, then that's great.
Yeah. No, that's lovely. What would one thing about how other people, who mightn't care as much about frogs as you do, if you could change one thing about how people view or treat frogs, what do you think that would be?
Well, I've been slightly facetious by sort of thinking it's easy being green. Thanks, Kermit the Frog. People are squeamish. So, for example, my sister hated frogs. She thought that they were wet and yucky and all that sort of thing. But actually, she liked frog calls. So, if I'd say, "That's a frog call," she'd go, "Oh, that's interesting. Don't bring it near me."
Yeah.
So, if you can approach it in a different way, or educate somebody and say, "Well, yeah, okay, you don't have to touch it, but what about either looking at it or just listening to it? Or what about the other things that are in the environment that frog is in, like some birds or something like that?"
Other things
It
that
just
benefit
shows that,
from it.
yeah, there's other things that are associated with that which are really good. I always look to try to go from another angle if somebody's, uncomfortable with a frog. But to tell you the truth, I don't know too many people who are really anti-frogs.
Yeah. I like that answer. I'm glad we brought that up because I think that's really important is, trying to influence people's perceptions of things to maybe give them a different way to think about it that they haven't thought about that might, make them appreciate frogs a bit more or think they're not so bad.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
What gives you hope for the future of frog conservation?
I think there always has to be hope. If you don't have hope, I think things would be very distressing and depressing. And I choose not to look at things that way. I choose to look at things with hope. We have done a very good job at stuffing up the environment, but we are also, where we have the ability to, making some significant changes to improve it. So I always choose to look at it with hope. And for example, that's why I've done 20, however many years with Rivercare to try to change the environment for the better. The other thing that I really think is important is working with kids on this, because they're going to be the next decision makers. They're going to be the next people who have influence on how our environment is going to go. They're probably going to look back at us and say, "Gee, thanks, folks. You've really stuffed it up and now we've got to sort it out." But there will be some of there that have gone through, for example, we've had lots of kids down to the wetlands to, over the years, we've had multiple school groups, like greater than 50 interactions with school groups. And I hope that teaches at least some of them there's something really interesting out there, and just piques that interest enough for them to continue with that. So I always think there's hope with childhood education and increasing environmental awareness.
Yeah.
And that's not just frog conservation. That's changing the way we do what we do. So during the wetland project, we had 8 different school groups come down. They all ranged from sitting down and having a talk, which they then had an assessment on, to planting plants, to helping us with cleanup. At one point we had 35 TAS students there, and we really needed to get some stuff out of the creek so we could get it ready for some planting. And these kids got in there. They came out as black as mud. They were absolutely filthy. Grins as ear to ear, had an absolutely wonderful time, and they just got in there and went. It was fantastic. We had other kids who were planting plants, and we gave them all a permanent texture. And when we plant a plant, we put a milk carton around it. We said, how about you write your name on this plant so you know that you planted it in the future? And they took to it like a duck to water. They thoroughly enjoyed it. It was, it was really, it was a good way to get engaged with those sorts of students. It was good.
Yeah, that's a great example. Oh, well, I think that brings us to an end of our episode. But before we leave, I like to leave everybody with an actionable step that they can take away. And, anybody and everybody could do it to help out our frogs, or even just a key message from the episode. Can you think of anything in particular that you would recommend or like to share with everybody?
2 things. One, download the Frog ID app. It will make things really, really easy. It doesn't matter where you live. Even if you're listening to this in an apartment building in Sydney, put a frog hotel on your balcony.
Yeah.
Do it at home if you've got a garden. If you've got a garden and you can't put in a pond, put in some natives and a soak area, some native grasses like juncus or carex or lamandra or whatever might be local for your area. Just make that little bit of change, which might make things just a little bit more frog-friendly for species.
Yeah. They're lovely and they're easy steps. And, even doing a frog hotel doesn't have to be an expensive project. You can be resourceful and make it out of lots of different things if you get creative.
Absolutely. Literally, they need somewhere that they can crawl into, preferably, greater than, say, 2 centimeters internal diameter, and a source of moisture.
Yeah. Easy. Oh, well, thanks so much for that, Angus. Thanks so much for joining us.
My pleasure, of course, Jessica.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Nature's Nexus podcast. I hope you enjoyed it and found some value in what was shared today. I look forward to presenting more knowledge and sharing ways we can connect to nature in future episodes, and hope you tune in with me to listen, learn, and act. Thank you, and until next time.